Across the galaxy, the war had no beginning that anyone alive could remember. For countless generations, fleets had launched from fortified worlds, and soldiers had marched across ruined planets. Empires rose only to be consumed by conflict, and entire civilizations had been reduced to ash clouds drifting among the stars. Every empire claimed victory was within reach, yet each offensive ended in stalemate, every advance countered by some rival determined not to yield. The war had become less a contest of strategy and more a cycle, a machine fueled by vengeance and fear, grinding onward without pause. Planets that had once blossomed with forests and oceans were now nothing but scorched husks. Moons were stripped of resources, turned into hollowed fortresses, then destroyed before they could be captured. Nebulae hid ambushes that devoured fleets, while star systems once vibrant with trade had become graveyards of drifting wreckage. The passage of time meant little. To many species, war was all they had ever known. For the younger races, conflict was the inheritance of their ancestors. For the older ones, it was an unshakable habit, ingrained into the very rhythm of their existence. The scale of destruction was beyond comprehension. Fleets numbered in the thousands of vessels, each one capable of leveling continents. Weapons pulled power from suns, tearing matter apart at the atomic level. Yet no matter how advanced the weaponry, the result was always the same: annihilation followed by retaliation, and the balance of power remained unchanged. The Council of Concordance, once created to mediate disputes between civilizations, had long ago devolved into a fractured assembly of bitter enemies, clinging to fragile alliances that broke as easily as glass. Those who observed the galactic stage saw nothing but hopelessness. Veterans who had spent centuries in battle knew no alternative to endless fighting. Commanders sought glory not in victory but in survival. Civilizations whispered prophecies of an eventual end, but none dared imagine what that end might be. The war had become so large, so ingrained, that it seemed eternal. No empire was capable of rising above it, and none were willing to stop. For all their brilliance, alien civilizations had trapped themselves in their own pride. Their doctrines were rigid, their battle plans predictable, their strategies built on centuries of tradition. Even the most cunning tactician could not escape the inevitability of attrition. It was as though the galaxy itself demanded blood, and the countless species obliged, generation after generation. Some races fought for dominance, others for survival, others simply because they could not remember what peace looked like. From the perspective of those immersed in it, the war had become a force of nature. To live was to fight, to stop was to perish. Entire cultures glorified sacrifice, feeding endless waves of soldiers into the void. Children were raised with tales not of peace, but of valor and destruction. Entire economies revolved around manufacturing engines of war, while science advanced not for exploration, but for the creation of new ways to kill. The galaxy was locked in a death spiral, and none believed an outside force could break it. And yet, in the shadows of forgotten sectors, rumors persisted. Whispers of systems untouched by the chaos, of a species that had watched silently while others bled. Few gave credence to such stories. After all, what could a new species accomplish when the greatest powers in existence had failed to overcome each other? The war was too vast, its legacy too deeply rooted. The notion that anything could change it seemed absurd. But beneath the despair, there lingered a question no one could answer. If this cycle had lasted so long, what would it take to bring it to an end? Would it be the rise of a single overwhelming empire, or the collapse of every faction in mutual destruction? Could peace even exist in a galaxy that had forgotten its meaning? The silence of the void offered no answer, only the endless echoes of war. This was the galaxy's reality, a battlefield stretching from one spiral arm to the next, where survival was measured in centuries and annihilation was always a heartbeat away. The war was not a story with an end in sight. It was the story itself, the only one any of them knew. And for those who fought, the only certainty was that tomorrow would bring another battle, another fleet destroyed, another world burned. They could not know that something was coming, something outside their comprehension, a force that would shatter this eternal pattern. But for now, the galaxy remained lost in its own endless war, waiting unknowingly for the moment when everything would change. The first signs of their existence came not with a declaration, but with disruption. At the edge of contested space, where fleets clashed daily and systems changed hands with every passing cycle, something unusual happened. A formation of ships appeared without warning, not bearing the markings of any known empire. At first, observers dismissed them as another desperate coalition, another minor race throwing itself into the furnace of galactic conflict. Yet what followed defied every expectation. The vessels looked crude compared to the sleek warships of the great powers. Their hulls lacked the ornate designs of the elder empires, their weapons did not shine with exotic energies, and their formations seemed almost too disciplined, too deliberate. When they moved, they did not follow the standard rhythms of galactic warfare. They advanced with unnerving precision, their trajectory cutting directly into battle zones where even veteran fleets hesitated. Those who witnessed their arrival described it less as the entrance of reinforcements, and more as the deliberate stride of predators stepping into a field of prey. At first engagement, disbelief turned to alarm. A human fleet, though numerically inferior, dismantled a far larger armada with uncanny efficiency. Their tactics were not simply unconventional, they ignored the entire framework of warfare others had perfected. Where alien commanders relied on centuries of doctrine, humans invented new maneuvers in the middle of combat. They created chaos in structured battles, forcing opponents to adapt to situations they had never trained for. By the time rival fleets tried to respond, their ranks had already been broken, their lines scattered, their command structure in disarray. Rumors spread with the speed of panic. Entire squadrons reported losses against a species no one had even heard of. Alien analysts scoured records, searching for any prior sign of humanity. All they found were fragmented reports from quiet sectors, notes of an industrial race progressing rapidly but never intervening in the wider conflicts. How a civilization so unremarkable in the past had suddenly emerged with such force was beyond comprehension. Those who fought them described an unsettling quality. Human vessels did not simply destroy, they dissected. Instead of annihilating opponents outright, they crippled critical systems, leaving ships drifting and commanders helpless. Communication arrays were targeted before engines, fuel reserves before weapons, command bridges before defensive shields. Every strike was calculated to strip an enemy of its will to resist. The message was unmistakable. Humans did not seek to win battles. They sought to erase the very possibility of continuation. Alien strategists debated endlessly, but consensus proved impossible. Some insisted humans possessed unknown technologies hidden beneath crude exteriors. Others argued it was not the weapons but the minds wielding them. Veterans who had survived encounters described the sensation of fighting opponents who never hesitated, who treated every engagement as though failure were not an option. In a galaxy where most civilizations fought to survive another day, humans fought as though survival was guaranteed by their victory. What unsettled observers most was not the destruction humans caused, but the silence that followed them. Systems once contested for centuries fell quiet after a single human intervention. Fleets that had sworn to fight to the last ship retreated before even engaging. The presence of humans became a psychological weapon. Their mere arrival was enough to break morale, to make seasoned commanders doubt strategies they had relied on for generations. For the first time in living memory, the rhythm of war changed. The endless cycle of attack and counterattack was interrupted by decisive outcomes. Battles that should have dragged on for weeks ended in hours. Sectors once considered unwinnable turned into human victories almost overnight. The stalemate that had defined the galaxy began to fracture, not through overwhelming numbers or superior firepower, but through the arrival of a species that refused to play by the accepted rules. Whispers spread across the fractured council, across empires exhausted by centuries of bloodshed. Who were these newcomers, and what did they want? They claimed no territory, made no declarations, sought no alliances. They appeared where the fighting was fiercest, dismantled the strongest fleets, and then disappeared again. To those watching from a distance, it seemed less like conquest and more like judgment. Wherever humans appeared, the war ceased. And as their presence grew harder to ignore, a single, unsettling truth became clear to the galaxy. Something had arrived that was not bound by the endless cycle, something that did not recognize stalemate as inevitable. Humanity had entered the battlefield, and nothing would remain the same. What set humanity apart was not the size of their fleets nor the sophistication of their weapons, but the way they thought about war itself. Other civilizations clung to traditions, following battle doctrines etched into their cultures across centuries. Human commanders, by contrast, treated every conflict as unique, every opponent as a puzzle to be dismantled. They abandoned the idea of symmetry and balance, embracing strategies that made no sense until the trap had already closed around their enemies. Where others sought control, humans sought disruption. Against massive armadas, they refused to mirror formation. Instead, they scattered into unpredictable vectors, forcing enemies to stretch their lines and reveal weaknesses. Alien captains accustomed to predictable engagements found themselves lured into kill zones they had not anticipated. Asteroid belts became ambush sites, dense atmospheres of gas giants turned into concealment fields, and gravity wells, once considered obstacles, were harnessed to slingshot ships into impossible trajectories. What was once useless space became a weapon in human hands. Even in direct combat, their methods defied logic. Rather than focusing fire on obvious targets, humans crippled command ships or supply carriers, cutting the heart from a fleet while leaving the body intact. Entire armadas, still bristling with firepower, collapsed in confusion when orders ceased to flow. In other cases, they ignored warships altogether, striking at logistical routes and fuel depots. By the time alien admirals assembled reinforcements, their fleets were already starving, unable to maneuver, unable to fight. What unnerved their opponents most was the willingness to adapt instantly. Alien powers relied on rigid strategies honed over millennia. Humans changed their tactics mid-battle, discarding entire plans without hesitation the moment conditions shifted. To fight them was to fight an enemy that refused to stand still. No two encounters unfolded alike. A strategy that succeeded once against humans failed catastrophically the next time, as though they had not only anticipated the adjustment, but prepared the counter before it was even attempted. Beyond strategy, there was something in their demeanor that shook even the most hardened veterans. Human soldiers did not fight with the desperation of those clinging to survival, nor with the arrogance of those convinced of superiority. They fought with an unsettling certainty, as though every engagement were already decided. Their communication was minimal, their coordination seamless, their willingness to sacrifice unnerving. An alien officer once remarked that they moved not like warriors, but like a single organism, every loss absorbed, every setback instantly redirected into momentum. In a galaxy where war had become ritual, humans refused to treat it as ceremony. To them, war was not an endless cycle to be endured but a problem to be solved. They did not measure success by territory gained or enemies destroyed, but by whether the fighting ended. That intent alone reshaped the battlefield. Civilizations conditioned to seek stalemate could not comprehend an opponent who would not rest until the conflict itself collapsed. As word spread of their methods, dread grew. Fleets that once believed themselves unassailable realized their advantages meant little. Size no longer guaranteed dominance, firepower no longer assured victory. The very foundations of galactic warfare, predictability, balance, repetition, were eroded. Facing humans meant confronting an opponent who did not care for rules, who did not respect limits, and who could turn the familiar into a liability. Historians would later argue it was not technology or numbers that gave humanity its edge, but imagination. They possessed the capacity to see battlefields differently, to exploit opportunities others dismissed as impossible. Where the galaxy saw obstacles, they saw tools. Where others saw stalemate, they saw endings. Every engagement was a lesson, every victory a refinement, every defeat an opportunity to learn faster than their enemies could react. For civilizations locked in endless patterns, this adaptability was devastating. Once humans entered a theater of war, its dynamics shifted irreversibly. Alien commanders who had fought for centuries suddenly found themselves outmaneuvered, their carefully crafted strategies rendered irrelevant. The realization spread like wildfire. Against humanity, survival was not a matter of matching force but of avoiding confrontation entirely. They were not simply another participant in the war, they were a force determined to end it, and their very presence made continuation untenable. As humanity's campaigns multiplied, the structure of the galactic war began to unravel. What had once been a stalemate of countless factions locked in balance suddenly tilted. Entire empires, previously defiant even against overwhelming odds, discovered that resistance against humans yielded nothing but humiliation. Their fleets, once feared as immovable pillars of power, collapsed in days, leaving borders exposed and reputations shattered. The very idea of unending war, something that had defined existence for generations, started to erode under the weight of swift, decisive defeats. Sectors long considered permanent battle zones transformed almost overnight. Regions where rival empires had poured centuries of resources found themselves silenced after only a single human intervention. Communication from those areas no longer carried reports of grinding battles, but stunned silence, as if war itself had been extinguished. The effect was not contained to those directly engaged. Word spread, and it carried more power than any weapon. Rumors of human victories traveled faster than fleets, destabilizing alliances before a single shot was fired. Within the council chambers, panic replaced arrogance. Delegates who had once hurled accusations now turned their fears toward the same subject. Some demanded alliances with the newcomers, others urged containment, and a few whispered of surrender before humanity even arrived at their doorstep. For civilizations forged on the certainty of eternal conflict, this sudden prospect of resolution was terrifying. They had no framework for peace, no precedent for coexistence outside of war. Humanity's presence forced them to confront questions they had never been willing to face. On the battlefield, the psychological shift was even more dramatic. Commanders, hardened by centuries of attrition, hesitated when human fleets appeared. Some withdrew without orders, unwilling to face the inevitable collapse of morale that came with engaging them. Others tried to mask their fear behind aggression, only to watch their forces scattered with surgical precision. Entire squadrons surrendered intact, not because they lacked the strength to fight, but because they no longer believed victory was possible. To fight humans was to embrace futility, and few had the will to endure it. The cascading effect reshaped galactic politics. Coalitions formed not around shared ideology or mutual defense, but around desperate attempts to predict where humans might strike next. Empires that had fought each other for eons entered fragile truces, hoping unity would dissuade intervention. Yet such alliances crumbled quickly. The moment humans appeared, suspicion and fear tore them apart, for no side trusted the other enough to hold when certainty of defeat loomed. Even diplomacy itself began to shift, no longer measured in posturing and threats, but in frantic bids to avoid becoming the next target. What unsettled the galaxy most was humanity's refusal to claim the spoils of victory. They dismantled fleets, neutralized war zones, and then moved on without annexing territory or installing rulers. This restraint baffled observers. Empires fought for resources, dominion, or survival. Humans seemed to fight only to erase the war itself. Their lack of ambition made them more terrifying, not less. If they had sought empire, the galaxy could have bargained with them. But a force without material demands, a force whose only aim was to end conflict, could not be manipulated or deterred. Whispers turned into legends. Some claimed humanity wielded secret weapons beyond imagination, others believed their minds themselves were weapons, driven by something alien in its determination to finish what others could not. To many, it did not matter what the truth was. The perception alone reshaped the course of events. For the first time in memory, the idea of surrender carried no shame, because surrendering meant survival. To resist meant annihilation of not just fleets, but of the very will to fight. The war that had endured beyond lifetimes was collapsing, not from exhaustion or treaty, but from the presence of a species that refused to let it continue. Entire civilizations found themselves forced into silence, not by conquest, but by the sheer inevitability of defeat. The balance that had once defined galactic existence was gone, replaced by a new reality. Humanity had arrived, and in their wake, the galaxy discovered that war itself could be dismantled, piece by piece, until nothing remained of the cycle that had consumed them for so long. The end did not arrive with grand proclamations or negotiated accords. It came in the form of silence, spreading from system to system until the endless roar of war was replaced by stillness. Entire sectors that had once been alive with the chaos of battle went dark after human intervention, not because their fleets had been annihilated, but because those fleets had chosen never to fight again. Where once every channel carried demands for vengeance and declarations of defiance, now there was only the uneasy quiet of a galaxy unsure of its future. Alien historians, struggling to record the collapse, found themselves unable to define what had taken place. No empire had conquered the others, no ultimate weapon had forced capitulation. Instead, the arrival of a single species had shifted the psychology of war so completely that fighting had become meaningless. The great fleets that had once seemed eternal now rusted in orbit, their commanders unwilling to waste lives against an enemy whose presence made resistance impossible. The war that had raged beyond memory ended not through decisive annihilation, but through the collapse of will. For many, this peace felt less like victory and more like disorientation. Cultures that had defined themselves by combat suddenly faced an emptiness they did not know how to fill. Economies built entirely on weapons production faltered, propaganda machines fell silent, and generations raised to see war as inevitable found themselves without purpose. Entire societies struggled with the sudden void, as if they had been stripped of the very meaning of existence. The most powerful empires, accustomed to defining the fate of others, discovered their influence gone. They had not been defeated in the conventional sense, but their dominance no longer mattered. What unsettled them most was humanity's withdrawal. After bringing an end to the conflict, they did not claim thrones or impose rulership. They did not demand tribute, carve out colonies, or proclaim themselves overlords. They simply left behind the ruins of battlefields and the echoes of silence, moving on as if the war had never been theirs to begin with. This refusal to claim spoils was more frightening than conquest could ever have been. Conquerors could be bargained with, appeased, or resisted in time. But a force that sought nothing was beyond comprehension, beyond control. Whispers of human intent spread faster than facts. Some believed they had ended the war as a test, measuring the galaxy's strength. Others feared they would return to enforce their will once more, striking down any who dared reignite the cycle. Still others claimed humanity had acted out of disgust, unwilling to allow such a conflict to poison the stars any longer. Whatever the speculation, the result was the same: no one dared resume the fighting. Fear of humanity's reappearance was stronger than any treaty, stronger than any deterrent weapon. For the first time in living memory, the galaxy tasted peace. It was not harmony born of understanding, nor trust built through cooperation, but it was peace nonetheless. Fleets remained docked, weapons untouched, commanders reluctant to test their fortunes against the species that had ended what no one else could. The silence of the battlefields became a reminder that war was not indestructible, that the cycle could be broken. Yet it also served as a warning that its return might summon humanity again, and with them, the end of all resistance. In the centuries that followed, scholars would debate endlessly what humans had truly achieved. Some described them as saviors, others as executioners of a way of life that had defined countless civilizations. But across all interpretations, one truth was undeniable: the galaxy that had once been enslaved to endless war was freed by their arrival. Not through treaties, not through dominance, but through an overwhelming certainty that wherever humans walked, conflict itself ceased to exist. And so the legacy was written in the quiet aftermath. The endless war had ended, not because the galaxy chose peace, but because a single species had forced it upon them by existing as a final answer. The great civilizations were left to rebuild, to rediscover identities beyond battle, forever marked by the realization that when humans stepped onto the battlefield, war itself did not merely pause, it died.